So good morning, everybody. Hello. Good morning. No, leave it open right now. It's going to be fine. So today we are, and I forgot to remove that on the title, but today we are talking about the formal portraits by Rubens, Van Dyck, and Jordaens, who I hadn't added to the list. But I just correct myself there. These are the three big names in the 17th century Antwerp for what we can call portraits and historical paintings. We have many other great painters, but I'm going to do smaller format paintings and more of a genre or still life, and we'll see them in the coming sessions. So three big names, of course, Rubens, definitely number one. He overshadowed everybody. He was known all over Europe, became the number one painter. Even in Italy, he was asked to do things that no other painter could do. So let's look a little bit at the history of portraiture. Portraiture really starts in the early 15th century with Van Eyck. The Flemish painter Van Eyck changed portraiture. Until then, portraits were made in profile, following what was done on the Roman coins, for example. Profile was much easier, but it completely hid any personality of the sitter. So once Van Dyck started having that three-quarter view, you suddenly see both eyes, and you can put into the painting the personality of the sitter and the kind of character he could have. So I'm showing you here the famous man with the red turban, and this was the headdress that was fashionable at the time. Quite cumbersome, but very handsome. And his wife, Margaret Van Eyck, on the other side. And you can see how this portrait is going to revolutionize the idea of portraiture. And it's going to be so much so that Flemish painters are going to be called in Italy to do portraits more than the Italian painters. The whole northern part of Italy is calling on the Flemish painters to come and make portraits and gallery of portraits for their castles. So we have here the men that are going to come from burghers and for aristocrats. And normally we see this is sometimes to the waistline or sometimes just the bust. Rarely we see a full body type of portrait, but it happens. And you all know, of course, the Arnolfini portrait, that absolutely wonderful, but small painting. If you see it at the National Gallery, it's surprisingly small compared to what we'll see later as these very large portraits of the aristocracy and so on. This painting, I'm not going to debate too much because this is not the goal, but was considered as a painting of a marriage. But in fact, it's a memento mori, because by the time the painting was painted, the young woman had already died. And so it's kind of more of a memory for the husband. It's a fascinating painting, and the colors are extraordinary, very typical of the quality of Van Eyck. Then we see in the 16th century other kinds of portrait, but for example, both Holbein and Clouet, Holbein at the court of England, Clouet at the court of France, is going to be asked to do portraits, systematic portraits of all the courtiers around. And so you have literally books of these portraits that are, you know, the size of a large sheet of, at that time, the new papers, because paper only comes in the mid-15th century. So they paint this, and this is very typical. On the right, by Hans Holbein, the Lady Mutas, who was lady in waiting of the Queen over there. And here we have Diane de Poitiers by Clouet, and she was the mistress of Henry II, long time mistress. of Henry II to the dam of to the chagrin of Catherine of Medici, who really resented that, as you can imagine. We also find some interesting miniatures. This was also a good way of having a portrait that you could carry with you. You have to realize these portraits were typically not exhibited. These portraits would be kind of stored away and then pulled out if you wanted to show them. These are very small and so quite portable. Somebody could carry that along in the purse or in the pocket. And these are, of course, Nicolas Hilliard, who was one of the most known miniature painter in England, and absolutely extraordinary painter. And then on the right, again, Clouet, Jean Clouet, with the portrait of Charles de Cossé, who was actually a young cardinal and died very young in combat. And then by the end of the 16th century, we also see family portrait. And this is a painting by Otto van Veen, who was the third teacher of Rubens, that is representing himself surrounded by his entire family. And I think it's an adorable portrait. It's a little naive in the sense that it's shown, because imagine that crowd, 19 people surrounding, 18 surrounding him. So that makes 19 altogether. And in the two cartouches on both sides, you have the name of everybody that is represented. Pardon?
How large of a painting would that
That's
be?
a good point. I would say it's a medium, probably a medium size to be able to stuff everybody around. It has to be at least that size. It's not going to be huge. They were still painting on panels at that time. This is not a canvas. So it's going to diminish it. And you can see actually that one girl is carrying the portrait of another one. That means that that one died. So she's just taken into the crowd with her portrait. But a pretty good looking family when you see that. And Otto van Veen was an interesting person. He was not an extraordinary painter, but was very intellectual. He had gone to Italy, had studied the classical text, and was quite influential on Rubens, because he's the one who insisted that he goes to Italy. And that's where Rubens learned most of the things. And you can also appreciate that it's a variety of poses that make it interesting. So on the right, by the way, his two brothers and his father, and probably a nephew of his. The rest on the left is all his family.
And the young one that's petting the cat.
Yes.
She looks very Asian compared to the rest of them, do you think?
Yeah, but you find that tendency that they have to make eyes slightly slanted, and I don't exactly know why it is, but no, she's Asian, was totally foreign to Belgium at that time.
Even the skin color is.
No, skin color is a kid that is outside a lot. Okay, so here is, I bring back the timeline. And so you can see here, Rubens, Van Dyck, you can see how short a life, unfortunately, he had. He died at the age of 42. Rubens had a longer life here. He was in his early 60s when he died. And then Jordaens has a almost equivalent life. An interesting figure that we'll see at the end. And as I feel guilty when I see that I can only give one class with some of it dedicated to Van Dyck, because he was a fabulous artist. And one day I might give a whole class on Van Dyck, we'll see. Jordaens being very good too. I'm putting down Jan Bruegel because he's going to appear in the other class and was such a good friend, very close friend to Rubens. They were godfathers of their children and attended the marriages and everything. So very close friends. A quick reminder of Rubens' life, which was incredibly busy. He was born in Siegen in Germany, was the sixth of 7 children. One of his elder brother, by the way, was a painter, but never achieved even close to the career of Peter Paul. He joined St. Guild in 1598, and by 1600, as a master, he leaves with a good friend of his to Italy with a letter of reference to the Duke of Mantua from the governess of the Low Countries at the time, who was a close friend to him. And so he starts his trip in Venice, as we know. There meets another person who knows the Duke of Mantua and also refers him to him, because the Duke of Mantua was quite a collector. And so he was impressed by what the young painter was doing and his personality, which always was in his favor. He spends 8 years in Italy, traveling to Spain very quickly, and then within Italy he's going to go many times to Rome, to Genoa, Florence, etc. In 1608, he comes back. His mother is dying, and he's hoping to see her before her death, but he arrives about a week after she passed away, or 9 days. And then very quickly, he comes back. It's like his fame is already there before he comes back. He's immediately in demand for an incredible amount of commissions. And we have to keep in mind that at the end of the 16th century, Antwerp had gone through a difficult time and a lot of destruction had occurred. And so during that time, in 1609, it's the beginning of a truce of 12 years that's going to help Antwerp come back on its feet, if you want. They start a lot of reconstruction and restoration and so on. And Rubens is there. And so he's going to be asked to make an altarpiece for this, altarpiece for that, ceilings, painted ceilings for new churches, and so on. So it also gets the privilege of becoming the painter to the Archdukes Albert and Isabella, who are by then the governors of the Low Countries, delegated by the King of Spain. Albert comes from the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs, and Isabella comes from the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs. They are second cousins, and they get married. They won't have any heirs, unfortunately. Otherwise, the Low Countries were going to become part of their dowry and pass it on, their inheritance, and pass it on to their children. But because they didn't, finally, after the death of Albert, a few years later, Isabella will go back to Spain. In 1609, Rubens marries Isabella Brandt, who gave him 3 children. Unfortunately, the elder one, the girl, Clara, is going to die in 1621, and Isabella Brandt will die of the plague in 1626. To the great chagrin of Rubens, who really was in love with his wife. In 1629 and 30, he's sent by the King of Spain to London as a diplomat / painter. And getting into the court at that time was easier if you were a great painter and become almost a friend of the king, if you want. You could really befriend the king. That's what the Spaniards were hoping. It didn't work. They wasn't given full power of a diplomat and became very frustrated by that. But in the meantime, had made, actually before going to the court, made a lot of friends from the different English people that were going through Antwerp. And that includes the Arundel family, as well as the, what's the name of it? I'm forgetting now. There's another very influential family that was close actually to the Arundel that became ambassador of England to the Low Country, to the Republic of the Netherlands. And so it's through these networks of friends that he's really getting an influence and be able also to get information on what happens in the countries. He's got great friends in Paris who send him information of what happens in France, and he can relay that to the king. So he has quite an interesting life. In 1630, he remarries, and he marries a girl of 16 years old, Hélène Formand. He's 52 at the time, but justifies that in saying that at least she's not an aristocrat. A lot of aristocrat women were after him. He was a very handsome guy, tall for the time, and very cultured. So a lot of women were after him. But he knew that being a painter, they would always look down at him because he was working with his hands, and aristocrats didn't do that. So he wanted to marry a bourgeois woman, and he found his eyes went, looked at the sister of the portrait he made of the beautiful woman with the large hat, black hat, the Suzanne Formand, and Hélène Formand was younger, 16, and he asked her to marry him, and he was the Prince of Antwerp. How can you say no, right? So he married her, and she gave him 5 children. After his death, she remarried and had another 4 with her second husband. And then on the 31st of May, which is my mother's birthday, in 1640, Rubens died of a heart attack due to the gout. He had had a crisis of gout for quite a while, though he was not a big eater. He was known to be very frugal in his eating, almost vegetarian, and he wasn't drinking much either. So who knows? But he died of a heart attack and was really missed at that time. So we're going to look at some of the portraits he did. This is a portrait he did very young. He's actually 20 when he did that, and we don't know who the sitter is. We know he's a young scholar because of the way he's dressed, and he's showing a watch, as you can see, that he hanging from his hand. So we don't know if he was an astronomer or anything of the kind. This painting is, by the way, on copper, and in 2 sessions we will talk about paintings on copper. He made also a very large painting of the Gonzaga family, so the reigning family in Mantua. So while he was there, he was asked to make that big family that was kind of a mixture of altarpiece and family portrait. When you look at this and you say, this is bizarre, and no surprise, because this is only what is left of a huge painting that was destroyed during the raids of Napoleon in Mantua, where unfortunately it was cut in pieces. The wings, the external wings that we don't even see here, are one in Antwerp and another one in a museum in France. This is the way it would have looked originally. So you can see very different. It makes much more sense once you see this. So it was literally cut in pieces, and some pieces thrown away. So, but they were on top of that 2 large wings that were kept in the north. It's always sad when you see that. So you see the Marquis of Gonzaga on the left and the Marquise on the other side. While he's in Italy, he's also going to go multiple times to Genoa. It's not that far from Mantua. And of course, Genoa was that very, very prosperous port and trading city that was governed by a city oligarchy consisting of members of aristocratic families such as the Pallavicinis, Durazzos, Grimaldis, Spinolas, and others. And what is interesting is that the women had quite a role in Genoa. The city was renowned as a paradiso delle donne, a paradise of women. So no surprise that some of the most extraordinary portraits he did as a very young man, still at that time, were the portraits of women, and in such regalia that it still astonishes us when we look at it now, because the dresses are incredible. And of course, they have the big ruff bordered by lace all around the neck, really framing their face coming out of there. But look at the texture, the way he renders this satin. This one, by the way, was a full-size one, but was cut at a later date. And of course, managing to have the red behind the face and the ruff, which is also a good system. As we know, he had multiple siblings, but his favorite for sure was Philip, who was just a few years older than him. And Philip was a philosopher, got his doctoral degree in Rome when he was there, and was a follower of Justus Lipsius, who was the proponent and really the person who awakened the trend of the Neo-Stoics. This is the bust of the what we call pseudo Seneca that appears here, that became part of the collection of busts that Rubens owned, who was supposedly the philosopher that Justus Lipsius was looking at. In fact, we don't know exactly how Seneca looked, but he didn't look at all like this. But for whatever reason, that was attributed to him. And during the life of Rubens, everybody thought it was. So what you see here is you have the you have Rubens and then his brother Philip. They look very similar, by the way. And then you have Justus Lipsius, who by that time had already died, but is part of the conversation. And then another friend here on the across from them, who is also a philosopher, Woverius, who was also an important figure in Antwerp. And it's quite interesting because you look, typically Flemish, you have to have symbolism in painting. Look at the 4 tulips there. And you have one that is closed. That's the one of Justus Lipsius, who's dead. So the one that open represents people that are alive, and the one that is closed shows the one who is dead. So Neo-Stoicism, this is just a little word because it's going to be really important. Rubens, at least at the beginning of his career, is going to be quite influenced by Neo-Stoicism. It's a philosophical movement that arose in the late 16th century from the works of Justus Lipsius. It's proposing a lot of ideas that go back to Seneca and Stoicism, the idea that you live what we would call here in Arizona with the Native American, the middle way. It's really that idea that you don't have excess in either position. You don't get too happy or you don't get too sad. You have to just stay in the middle and be serene. Be very careful with your friends. Don't surround yourself with friends that are too demanding. There are some part of that philosophy I so much agree with. It's quite interesting. You have to just keep good vibes around you. That's really the idea. Don't eat too much. Just take care of your health. So the founder, you know, but what was interesting, he was also a very religious man, Justus Lipsius, and wanted to combine the beliefs of Stoicism and Christianity, which was something that had happened during the whole Middle Age, where you have scholasticism that tried to always justify the writings that existed before to show that continuation with Christianity. And it was sometimes really far-fetched, but in this case, Justus Lipsius is doing the same. He wrote many treatises, including the De Constantia, which was a treatise about how people should behave between them and also relate with the authority. And he had another book that was talking to the rulers and how to deal with their subjects. So it's quite interesting. He had a chair at the University of Louvain in Belgium, in the Low Countries at that time. And then when they started having religious problems in Belgium, he moved to Leiden in the northern provinces where he taught also. And Leiden was the first university in the United Provinces of the Netherlands. The tenets of Neo-Stoicism, in 2 sentences, it's very short. Emphasis on self-preservation and management of the passions. The basic rule of good life is that a person should not yield to the passion, but submit to God. And so that's where you have the. So Rubens, as we know, early on is going to very much obey by these rules, and then he's going to become tired of it, and he's going to distance himself from it. But here is again one of the paintings in 1614, so he's been back to Antwerp for 5 years, and he paints the death of Seneca, that Roman philosopher, who was asked by Nero, because he had been one of the close advisor to Nero, and then criticized him. And so Nero turned around and said, okay, just commit suicide now. And this is what we say. So Seneca was not Socrates. He was probably not as courageous, and decided that he was going to take a poison and cut his veins so that it would go faster. And because it wasn't coming fast enough, they put him in a warm tub so that the blood runs faster. And this is what you see there. This is directly influenced by one sculpture that Rubens had seen in the Vatican and is now in the Louvre, and where you can see what was thought to be the dying Seneca, but in fact is an old fisherman. But you can see that the position is directly inspired by it. But also you can appreciate that treatise that Rubens wrote while he was in Italy, to make sure not to, when you copy something made of marble or stone, that it doesn't look like stone when it's on the canvas. Make sure that it looks like flesh. And that's actually very real there. He's going to make all kinds of portraits, and I had to really pick up among a few so that you have a variety. This is a portrait of a Flemish Antwerpenaar, so a person from Antwerp, but had visited the Orient, had been to the Levant, including Jerusalem, and thought it was really exotic and brought back some costumes. And he's here posing in Turkish clothes. We'll see the same with Rembrandt later on too, by the way. You can see the nice Oriental on the floor too. Rarely set on the floors. Most of the time they were on tables. This is a wonderful one, and this is in fact more of a study than a finished portrait, but it's superb. And it came to an exhibition at the Phoenix Art Museum when we had an exhibition of the collection of the Museo de Arte de Ponce in Puerto Rico. And that painting was there, and I fell in love with it. I thought the face of, and the texture, the hair, and so on is just so magical. And it shows the head of the oldest of the three magi. And here is the study that is copied here by Paulus Pontius after Rubens, but study of the elderly man. It's so beautiful to see the shadows. He, of course, once he was in England, was asked to make family portraits. And this is the famous portrait of Lady Arundel and her train. And in fact, the person that is next to her, and it's not the Count of Arundel, is the name that I forgot, that I can't come back on, but was a close friend, was also a friend of Rubens. And here she appears with his children, as well as the dwarf and the large dog, hunting dog, that is next to her. Typical of what Rubens is starting, which shows no more hieratic type of portrait. It's a much more easygoing, more gentle relationship when you see them, and with an incredible backdrop with these Solomonic columns, Taurus columns, and then the landscape in the background, which is going to go to Van Dyck after that. He's going to borrow that and go on. The Arundel family was a very prominent family in England that had remained Catholic. And it's only when he was asked to be part of the Privy Council of the King that the Lord of Arundel Howard, that we'll see in a minute, is going to convert to the Church of England. But by the time he's disgraced a little later on, he goes to Italy and reconverts to Catholicism. He didn't need to pretend. This is the Earl of Arundel, Thomas Howard, and the study that Rubens made of it before making the painting of him in body of armor. He made multiple portraits of the Howard. He was a very close friend of his during his time there. Apparently, Thomas Howard had no real talent in fighting, but he had quite a presence. He was a tall man and quite handsome. This is also a wonderful painting. This is done back in the Netherlands, in Antwerp. Deborah Kipp and her children just so alive. I think it's wonderful to see the kids just looking, the big eyes, curiosity. The baby is looking at his older sister here, and then you have the young boy looking at his mother, and you know the magnificent columns and atlas almost here, or caryatid, and the landscape in the background changes completely the way portrait was understood at the time. The Duke of Buckingham, George Villiers, also very known figures, and of course he appears in Dumas writings about the Three Musketeers and so on. Duke of Buckingham has become probably more of a known character because of Dumas' writing. Very, very handsome guy, as you can see, was painted multiple times also by Rubens, who actually had sold his collection of ancient sculptures, gems, and coins to the Duke. He was an influential politician, not always successful, and will be assassinated still in pretty young age. Rubens didn't do too many self-portraits, and every time he did, it was asked by the patrons. He was not the kind to do it by himself, but patrons wanted to have a self-portrait of Rubens in their collection. And so he did, this is probably the most famous, done in 1629. He will do a few others, but this is probably the most known. And you can appreciate why he was known as a charmer. Very intelligent man, spoke 6 languages, including Latin, would converse, had a long correspondence with the French Renaissance men, we can say Peresque, and he would write in Italian. He could just, but he spoke fluently French. Flemish was his mother tongue, German because he had lived there until the age of 12, Spanish and Italian, and then Latin. Moving to Anthony van Dyck, let me see if I can get there, who was born in Antwerp, son of a rich silk merchant. As we know, Antwerp was used to be a very rich city. Unfortunately, it suffered tremendously from the sack of Antwerp by the Spaniards, from the Beeldenstorm, the iconoclastic problem that they had in the 1569. And so really went into decline when when the northern provinces wanted to secede. There became a war between them, but was still a rich city anyway. He was apprentice in Hendrik van Balen's workshop. He was one of the secondary masters and became master at the Guild of St. Luke in 1680. He never studied with Rubens, but came into the workshop of Rubens as a collaborator. As you know, Rubens had so many commissions. He had some high-level talents that were working with him to be able to fulfill all these demands. And Van Dyck was one of them. But the problem is that he had so much talent himself, he wanted to be recognized as such. And as long as Rubens was there, he had no chance. So the only way for him was to move around. He first went a quick sojourn in London, worked for James I, but could never be introduced to him. And by 1621, he traveled to Italy and went to Genoa, Rome, Palermo, and then came back to Antwerp, where he worked until 32. And by 32, people told him Charles I is asking for painters to move to London. There was not a real painting school in England. And so they were calling on particularly onto Flemish painters to move to London to be able to be court painters and fulfill all the orders that they wanted for portraiture and other decorative things. So he settled there, was very quickly named chief court painter for Charles I and was knighted by the king, as was Rubens, by the way, had been knighted by the king. It's Sir Peter Paul Rubens and Sir Anthony Van Dyck. In 1639, pushed by the king, who really wanted him to settle for good in England, he marries him to a lady in waiting to the queen. And so he married Mary Ruthven in 39, though he had a known mistress in Antwerp. And so he got actually, unfortunately for him, he got two babies almost at the same time, one from his mistress, one from his new wife. And his legitimate girl was baptized the day he died. It's really quite interesting. And he died in London in 41, was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral, but it was the old St. Paul's Cathedral, which was destroyed by the fire, and is going to, so his tomb was destroyed in that, but was rebuilt. We don't know where his remains ever went, but they rebuilt. If you go to the crypt in St. Paul Cathedral, there's a huge monument to Van Dyck. And he died probably of tuberculosis at age 42. He was a man of incredible talent, very precocious. Here are two wonderful self-portraits, one at age 14, the one on the left, that shows obviously a kid with very inquisitive eyes. And then later, at age 21, the one on the right that is very known, very gracious. He was also a handsome guy and very, just like Rubens, very at ease in the courtly environment. In that second one, you can see the influence of Raphael. This is a study he made of a portrait by Raphael, and you can see he's taking almost a similar pose. Close to the family of Rubens, we know this is a portrait of Isabella Brandt, the first wife of Rubens, that is done by Van Dyck here, and reflects as a backdrop the beautiful portico that is in the backyard of the house, Rubens' house in Antwerp. But you can see she was dressed as a queen, not as the wife of a painter. She was known to have tremendous sense of humor. And then he does like Rubens and goes to Genoa. And here you can see the painting he did of Elena Grimaldi, a very known portrait with the little black boy holding the umbrella, and just on the steps of the portico of the palace in Genoa, and the beautiful landscape, long horizon. She's just the way he portrays her, she's elongated, but it's very sensitive, just the way that she looks from the corner of her eyes towards you, very elegant. He also did portraits of her two children, Filippo and Maddalena Cattaneo. When he went down to Palermo, he met a figure that was incredibly known at the time and very appreciated. And I'm talking about Sophonis Barangisola, who was that great female painter who had met Michelangelo, who had submitted as a child some drawings that she had made. And Michelangelo said, that's too easy. Showing somebody who's smiling is an easy thing. So she had to come back with another one where the same little girl is being bitten by a crawfish. And so is in that position, and that one Michelangelo really liked. And so she stayed in good contact with him. At that place here, she is 96 years old and still painting. She was married twice, and the second husband was a little younger than her, but totally adored her. And when she died, he's going to make an incredible epitaph on her tomb. But Van Dyck himself was impressed with her and said that their conversation taught him more about the true principles of painting than anything else in his life. Back in in Antwerp, these are family portraits, very typical of the spouses, Marie de Hart and Philippe Leroy. He was counselor to the Archduke Ferdinand, and his young wife was painted probably the following year. But these were the very typical official portraits that he would do. Probably my favorite of all is this one of Maria de Tassis. Interesting figure. She's part of the family of Turn and Taxis that you might be familiar with. When it was the Tassis family, which is the original name, they developed the first postal system in Europe in the late 15th century between Bergamo and Vienna by 1450, from Innsbruck to Italy, and Styria around 1460, and Vienna with Brussels around 1480. That was the very first time you had a postal system. With the time, it's going to be bought back by the countries that would accaparate, if you want, that new system. But the family became very instrumental to the Habsburg rule. Linking the rich Low Countries to the Spanish court was a very good idea too. So the term Turn and Taxis comes from the French title, which was, and I hope I have written, it was La Tour et Taxi. And so in German, it was modified to Turn und Taxis. And it's still a big family in Germany. This is an amazing portrait. I think she is, the little smile shows all her character. And then of course, again, the clothing is superb. Once he gets into England, he returns in 32, and his success was very, very rapid. He was knighted within a few months of his arrival. Her Majesty's Principal Painter in Ordinary, that was the title that was created for him, and he will have many successors until the 19th century. That allowed him to get a large pension in addition to the orders he carried out. A house was provided to him by the river in the district of Blackfriars, not far from the city of London. So he was escaping from the turmoil of London, but not too far from the king. And the king and the queen would regularly take the boat, go along the Thames and visit Van Dyck and spend hours with him, because he was such a well-educated person. They had great time doing that, until they finally made a causeway that was going from the king's to Van Dyck's Van Dyck's house so that they could go by horseback or other. We have to keep in mind that Charles I was the largest collector of art of the period. He had an incredible amount of paintings, sculptures, and other objects of art. He tried to persuade Orazio Gentileschi to settle in England. And later, when Artemisia came with him to finish a work that he had started, tried to convince her to stay, which she didn't care for. Did the same with Rubens, tried to keep him, it didn't work. And so with Van Dyck, the only way was to marry him to a woman who was from there. And these, by the way, are the children. I'm so sorry, I'm talking something. These are the children of Charles I, and it's absolutely terrible. That huge dog in the middle is fabulous. Is Coco okay with the dog? But very pretty, and then including the baby, and then the miniature dog on the bottom right. He's going to do a lot of portraits of children. This is a self-portrait of Van Dyck, and it's quite special because it's really centered on that huge sunflower that is across there. And he's touching the petal. So we know there is a symbolism there. It has to do with fame. And a lot of people at that time were painted with sunflower, and it had all to do with the way they were recognized. He's also showing the chain that has been offered to him by the king, and with his finger. The way also you see the way he's has the shape of his mustache and the little beard became known as the Van Dyck beard. This was the way, and even Charles I is going to start following that fashion. Even the clothes that he was wearing became fashionable and became the Van Dyck suit. If you know The Little Blue Boy by Gainsborough, this is a Van Dyck suit. And here you can see that, sorry, I went too fast. Oh no, okay, I miss it on one side, that's strange. Anyway, you can see that other painting showing a known figure at the time, also presented with a beautiful sunflowers. He will do numerous paintings representing Charles I, but these are probably the most known. The equestrian portrait of Charles I that shows him as, you know, that equestrian portrait always showed the power of the ruler. You look so big when you are on a horse, you know, you represented well. He was a short man, so it wasn't easy to make him look grand. And so this is one of the official portrait of him, showing he has the baton, which is typical of the ruler, and then the beautiful horse with that undulating mane in the back, and then the faraway landscape. The one on the right is a much more informal portrait, showing him hunting. And he's just there alone with the lad who is taking care of the horse. But again, see how Van Dyck is able to show him taller by taking a lower point of view and kind of enhancing his stature that way. Beautiful landscape. Van Dyck was a great landscapist. Could never, there are books of his paintings of landscapes that are beautiful, but he could never bring landscaping to England. For whatever reason, he was there as a portraitist or as a history painter, but not as a landscapist. But he adored to do that, and you can appreciate that in his paintings because he always adds landscapes in the background. This very interesting painting is in fact a triple portrait of Charles I. And this portrait comes from a commission that Henrietta Maria, the wife of Charles I, wanted to commission Bernini in Italy to make a bust of her husband. But Charles is Protestant. As such, he cannot ask a commission to Bernini, who works for the Pope. And the Pope is going to forbid that to happen. But if Henriette Marie is asking for it, she is Catholic. She's the daughter of the French king. If she asks for it and pays for it, it's okay. So the only way, as Charles couldn't go and see Bernini, and Bernini didn't want to go to Italy, to England, because it was Protestant, Van Dyck makes a triple portrait that's going to help Bernini to have an idea of a 3D Charles I. You can see he's dressed in 3 different costumes, and he has the Van Dyck beard. And this is the way it ends up, if you want. This is the molding, the plaster cast bust after Bernini. Unfortunately, when the bust was finished, it was sent to England, and it was exhibited in the Whitehall, and it burned down. It disappeared in the fire that burned Whitehall. And so we never see the result of it. But this is to show you a similar portrait that was done by Philippe de Champagne in France of Richelieu. And this is the finished bust that would have been similar by Bernini of the Cardinal de Richelieu. It would have been similar for Charles. And by the way, he wears the Van Dyck beard too. And here are just, this is the Queen, Henrietta Maria, originally from France. And a detail of her. That, by the way, was a shorter portrait and was lengthened in the century that followed to a full-size painting. Other type of great, this is the very known Pembroke family portrait, where you see the whole series of children around the mother and father. He was celebrated as a painter for the aristocracy, there is no doubt. Yes.
The one that they enlarged to be a full size.
Yes.
That was a different artist.
Yes. Yes. They're not sure who, it could be even Reynolds.
Okay. But was it just added on to the existing one, or was there?
No, added on to the existing one. So here's the large painting of the Pembroke family. Again, this is one of the very influential family in England. They had made their rise in Tudor times, where they acquired the earldom of Pembroke. It was the Herbert family. And the former Abbey of Wilton, and the 4th Earl holds his wand of office is as Lord Chamberlain. Again, very lively type of representation where you see people rotating and moving. You can almost imagine the conversation that's happening between them. And then he adds even some cherubs that are bringing gifts to that very influential family. Just to give you an idea on how big it is, it is in situ in the House of Wilton. So you can see it's very large. And in this process, they are recording the colors. They really go into the pigment with the camera to see the actual color that was used for the thing, because they want to be able to restore it correctly at a time. This is the House of Wilton, so Wilton House. And then also the Lord John Stuart and his brother, Lord Bernard Stuart, they were cousins. No, they say this supposed to be cousins, 17 and not yet 16, so almost the same age. This was made shortly before a 3-year trip abroad, but both will die during the Civil War. And Gainsborough saw that and made a full-size copy of it. They really loved it. Gainsborough was crazy about Van Dyck. And little girls, portrait of Philadelphia and Elizabeth Wharton, another great family. And the little dog that is. But typical Van Dyck, you always have that window to a landscape on the side, and then the nice drape on opposite. And then finally, the painting of his wife, Mary Ruthven. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes, because as I know, people like to stretch a little bit before we go into another aspect of Van Dyck, his portraits in prints. So just 5 minutes, be back at 11:03. Okay, online, if you have any question or if you have questions here, please put the light on. Thank you, Jerry. Yes, Hermine.
Do you have the name of the girl
I have it in my papers. I don't know if it's, no. She's, I think it's a Teresa something. Teresa or something, but I don't remember her last name. And she was taken care of by after he died, it's his sister who took care of the child.
There are still people by the name of Rubens and
No. Yes, but they're not.
No, I asked him on the internet, they say no.
No, it could be that they are, but Rubens himself has only descendants through the daughters. All the males, it only went one generation and then ended up with no heir. So the name has changed, and it's linked to the family that is in the south now, and who is a duke, the only duke in Belgium. So there is some descendants there, but that's all.
Did Rubens do more of the actual painting of portraits than he did of his other work? Or
It always,
did he continue
yeah,
to find out?
he would not have his full workshop, of course, when he was in England. So he probably had 1 or 2 assistants with him. It was always contingent to the price. No, but that's commercial. No, but that becomes the habit.
I think he's one of the original capitalists.
Yeah, but the result is he did very well. He could not have done everything with the number of commission he has. It's huge.
But now, did Van Dyck continue this structure?
Yeah, very much, because he was also swamped with commission. So he couldn't do everything. He would always touch up. But he had very high level painters that were working with him. And yeah. So if you wanted the face to be painted by him, you paid a certain price. If he was just touching up, you pay another price. If you wanted just him to design, because he designed everything.
I'm not getting a sense of Rubens' style, like how he was different.
He has trimmed.
There's a very distinct style.
He has an incredible scholarship in his composition. When he paints a large composition with gods and so on, he's known to be the only one that brings in the proper gods and brings all the symbolism that is there, because he was so knowledgeable.
I see.
So for people of the time that were aware of what that and that meant, it was a treasure to look at. Okay. Because they could see the story. that makes much more sense for them at the time than for us now, because we don't know,
What
or
about,
few of us know.
Van Dyck then, what did he?
I'm coming to it, we'll see, because I've just shown the portraits right now. I'm going to go to, not enough, but into some of the works he did to religious and others. Unfortunately, I just have not enough time to show the whole thing.
How do people in Antwerp communicate with London?
Through mail, carried by a horse, and
How long does it take? Any idea how, between
it could take 2 weeks,
2 weeks?
2 weeks, maybe less than that. I'm just going to go to the iconography. Any question online there? But you will see the quality in some of his work, where religious work, he can give expression that are just going straight to your heart. Van Dyck, he's a superb painter. I went to an exhibition long time ago in London where they had some of his large portraits. They're huge. And you belittled by it, when you look at it, but it's so beautiful. I love his Genoa, the black, the woman in black with the child, the little black boy behind. So do I, but Rubens, I love his, wow, these dresses were incredible when they, not be very comfortable, but beautiful. So everybody is silent down there. John, no questions. Okay, silence.
And when was that painted at the Phoenix Art Museum?
That exhibition, it was an exhibition of the collection of the museum in Puerto Rico. It was a whole series of paintings that were coming from.
What do you think, 5 years ago?
Oh no, much more. I would say 15 years ago or something like that. Yeah. Do you remember it? But that face was just superb. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go back because we still have some things to see. If you can turn off the lights, and I'm gonna bring you back up, that nobody's talking there. Okay, so we have to go back a little bit to Giorgio Vasari. And if you know of him, and he's a good painter, but he's particularly known for his writings when he wrote The Life of the Painters, Sculptors, and Architects in the 1550s. And that book was the first art history book, if you wanted to, existed, that was talking about the painters, starting with Cimabue and Giotto in Italy, and mostly showing Italian painters, and literally belittling what was done in the North. Vasari, who claimed to be very good friends with Michelangelo, was citing Michelangelo, saying that what they were doing in the North was of no value, and that they had no understanding of the anatomy and no this and so on. The only exception is going to be Van Eyck, that he had heard of, and because they were works of Van Eyck in Italy, he gave him some credit for what he was doing. But once these were reprinted and sent to the North, the Northern painters reacted to that, and they started writing their own history of art. And so you will have works by Karel van Mander, his Schildert book, which means the book of paintings, where he's going to list all the great painters that existed in the North, and also some in the South. And then later on in the 18th century, we have the same with Arnold Hauprach, and comes from the northern provinces. Van Dyck decides to make a book that's called The Iconography. iconographie ou vie des hommes illustres du XVIIe siècle. So iconography or lives of illustrious men of the 17th century. It's not only painter, it's known people, really known people. And he is going to make this engraving, and then the text is going to be written on the side, talking about all the deeds of these people. So just here, I'm listing what the others were. And so these portraits that he makes of painters and illustrious people are going to become the subject of collections. And I show you here two houses in England, one of in Scotland for the Duke of Buccleuch, has all these frames that you see on the wall are all part of these portraits that were engraved by Van Dyck. And then you have that other one here in Cornwall of that series of these, they're rather large engraving portraits, and they're beautiful. They were printed in Antwerp at the house of Plantin Moretus, which was the big printer known all over Europe for the quality of its printing. And this is the process. So it starts first with black chalk drawing. And then it becomes an etching. And this is the first stage, what they call stage 1 of the process, where he does mostly the face. And then he enhances it with some, in this case, this is with brush and gray ink. But here's how it moves on into the final stage. And so this is the 5th stage of Guillaume de Vos, Willem de Vos, who was a great painter in Antwerp at the time. And so this is going to be just to show you the process, but he's going to have literally hundreds of these beautiful engraving in the book, and this is going to become very known. As I mentioned with him, he's also going to do a lot of religious painting. I'm short of time. So I'm showing you a few aspects of his paintings. This is an apostle with folded hands, paper on oak panel. So he was first painted on paper and then glued on oak panel. Extraordinary rendering of the face. Very reminiscent of what we'll see with Rembrandt, in fact, later on. Amazing highlights. This is one of my favorite. I love that face of Christ. This is, again, it's kind of a study for a larger painting, Christ carrying the cross. Look at his eyes. They're just incredible. And the expression, the head slightly on the side is really beautiful. Or another, a larger, the Lamentation, which is at the Royal Museum of Fine Art in Antwerp. These are just examples of, you can see almost hundreds of the religious painting that he did. Saint Jerome. And I like the lion is smiling. You know the story of the lion and Jerome. Jerome, while he was in meditation in the desert, had an encounter with a lion who had a thorn in his paw. And he was able to remove the thorn from the paw of the lion, which became his friend forever and followed him. And there's a lot of legends around the lion. And so you always see Jerome with a lion, even in his study. And then he did also some mythological paintings. This is Cupid and Psyche. Again, you can see the landscape. Take that, take my word for it. He was such a fabulous landscapist. Now, the number 3 that I'm showing you is Jacob Jordaens, born in Antwerp in 93, so a little older than Van Dyck, was apprenticed to Adam van Noort, who is the same teacher that Rubens had at the second one, became an independent master in 15, married his teacher's eldest daughter, Anna Catharina van Noort, and had 3 children with her. He had his own successful studios in the 20s, but also collaborated a lot with Rubens on these very large commissions. Again, as I mentioned, Van Dyck and Jordaens were 2 of the collaborators that Rubens had that were full masters and excellent painters. So they were of high value. He became the leading figure in Antwerp in 1640 because Rubens died. And Van Dyck tried after the death of Rubens to come to Antwerp, but Jordaens had already taken over the place of Rubens, if you want, and he couldn't get any commission and had to go back to London. In 1655, he converted to Calvinism and then died. And that was a really tricky moment for him because, as you know, Antwerp, you had to be Catholic. And so if you were Calvinist, it was under the table. You couldn't show that you were Protestant at that time. And so it became a problem for him. He got fined multiple times. And so died in Antwerp of what was literally called a mysterious disease. Many people died and nobody has any idea what caused that death, but it was not the plague, it was something different. So he followed, pardon?
He was 85 years old.
Yeah. He followed local traditions. So in that way, he was different to the others, especially the genre tradition of Peter Bruegel. He depicted common people, Flemish people celebrating real Flemish life. Here is an early portrait of the artist family. And you can see he's the one on the left shown as a musician. He shows himself as a musician, but that's Jacob Jordaens there. And you see a happy family. The Belgian people were known to be pretty liking happy life, to eat well, to drink well, and to dance. That was known by all people that were crossing Belgium at the time. It's still the case, by the way. Definitely on the food and the drinks. Here is one of the portraits he did of some of the burghers in Antwerp. And you can see how there is a sense of what Rubens before and Van Dyck did too. You have that landscape and an architecture, this little square, but also with symbolism. You have the greenery there that are talking about fidelity between that young couple. Here's again a self-portrait of him and his family. As you know, he had 3 children, but at that time, it looks like it's early on. So this is the first little one who is well-fed, as you can see. And then behind there, carrying the basket with fruits and flowers is the servant, very well-dressed too. Portrait of his daughter Elizabeth, the eldest daughter, who unfortunately is going to die in her, I think, age 15 or so. No, sorry, 20. That's she's 20 there. And then the younger one, Anna Catharina. Portrait of an old man, but taking himself very seriously and still having the ruff. He was called also to the court of particularly as a Calvinist, to the court of the stadtholder in the northern provinces, and made that huge painting of the triumph of Frederick Hendrik, who was the stadtholder of the northern provinces at the time. And so you can see Frederick Hendrik in red in the middle, but surrounded by all kinds of gods and all bringing prosperity to the country with him and so on. Huge painting. But he did also all kind of different religious paintings and mythological painting. Here you have Mercury draws his sword to behead Argus. So Argus is the older man. Then I like the very philosophical face of the dog, who is really the easy. And then Mercury has put his the flout there. I don't know, but removing the sword, he's going to behead him. He's very known, Jordans, in Belgium for a series of paintings he did on the king drinks, which is the celebration of the feast of the Epiphany. At the Epiphany, it was known you always do the cake, the particular tart that is called frangipane. It's with an almond paste. And within the tart, you put an entire almond. And when you cut the pieces of the tart, the one that gets the almond is king for the day. And then he typically chooses his queen. And if it's a woman who gets it, she's the queen of the day, and she chooses a man to be the king of the day. But this, in the mind of a Calvinist, is a critique of the excesses that drinking brings. And so for him, the idea of doing this, and you can see that kind of cartouche on the top here, shows that the people that are drunks are jerks, literally, really stupid. But this is an incredible, he did different, I think there are 5 different compositions of the same subject, where he shows the king and you see him here drinking, but you look around and you have people throwing up, you have all these excesses because people feel liberated when they drink too much, and so they do things they wouldn't do otherwise. And it's actually a critique, but you can imagine the people that bought these paintings would have great fun analyzing all the figures that are part of the painting. So very known with us with this painting. This one is at the Kunsthistorisches, but there's one in Brussels, there's one in Antwerp. There are really many of these. So this will conclude, and I'm sorry I forgot to put the last slide, which tells you next time. So it's going to be, I think it's the 1st of November, we'll have paintings made in collaboration in Antwerp that are actually paintings not by Rubens and people around him, but Rubens and Snyders, for example, that Snyders was known for painting animals. And so they make a painting of Sisyphus being eaten by the eagle. And so you have the eagle made by Snyders and Rubens making the figure. And you have a whole series of these paintings in different composition that are made by Bruegel and Rubens, and Bruegel and other masters in Antwerp. And that became a fashion where you had painting with signatures of 2 or 3 masters at the time. So that was a wealth of a possession. So we'll talk, they're really interesting. So next time we'll talk about painting made in collaboration. So let me stop the recording.